Why is it that
we're all intuitive psychologists, right? I want to know why my family acts this way, or maybe I had a bad experience and I want to know how I can change that. I want to know whether when I get upset I should go take a walk or should I meditate on something. What is the right answer there? And while we can certainly experiment with ourselves in our daily lives, it's also good to know what the answer is via some sort of systematic investigation too. Certainly we can all figure out what works for ourselves, but sometimes there are general patterns across wide groups of people that we want to know, okay, the exercise is the best way to do, to get some particular type of benefit, or this factor affects something else.
a large line of evidence for imagery not being like vision has to do with different experiments that have shown we can't seem to reinterpret.
I am a cognitive psychologist and I teach a lot of the cognitive psychology classes here. Within cognitive psychology, I'm a psycholinguist, which means I use psychological experimental techniques to study how people produce and comprehend language. One of the questions that we focus on is what kinds of information the brain is actually paying attention to at different points when you're understanding language. And for a long time, when people were doing psycholinguistics experiments, they had people sitting at a computer screen and pushing buttons as they were reading sentences, and probably feels intuitive to you, that isn't natural language use.
Interpretation task.
Since we've had ways to use head-mounted eye trackers, we can actually look at people talking with other people and look at their responses to what's being said of them in those types of settings and still get an idea of what pieces of information are available to them. We're mostly trying to figure out what are some other non-linguistic sources of information that can come into play as well, and when do these pieces of information combine in our brain. I don't pay attention to the brain itself, but I'm asking these questions behaviorally.
Together however you want to.
The way the eye tracker works is when you refer to an actual object that's somewhere in this room, I will try to interpret what you're saying, and then, especially if you're asking me to pick up that object or pay attention to the object, my eyes will move to the object, and our eye movements precede our hand movements under those circumstances.
In this task, and the director actually tells the matcher what to do in the task, and basically
So I use phrases that might be a little bit ambiguous, and then I'm looking at what kinds of information could actually help the person who's on the interpretation end understand what's being
There's
said.
also another camera that uses some harmless infrared light and bounces it off this mirror and gets a picture of your eye.
And this is partly because for a long time psycholinguists only paid attention to linguistic information that might actually help you during an interpretation process. And if we're looking at naturalistic conversational settings, we can think about other not solely linguistic pieces of information that can actually help us understand what's being said. So the more we know about that, the more we can do things like have adaptive technologies that help people overcome certain limitations. If you have trouble with reading, then we can think about other sources of information that can help you overcome those things. Understanding what goes wrong when somebody has a stroke.
And what this says is, whatever you have in your space 4, we want you to describe to him and tell him to put it in space C.
Okay. One of the things that I like most about the psychology department here is just how much the students are involved in research, and also how much students are encouraged to do their own independent research. I think psychology can sometimes feel a little bit more intuitive. We're all lay psychologists. We have theories about people, and while you really need to do the real experiments to know whether our intuitions are true or not, it also gives students a really easy way to think, oh, I wonder why people behave this way in this situation. I think I'll read up about it and maybe I can do an experiment that way too. I think the most fun findings are the ones that are actually counterintuitive. I still love it when I have a hunch about the way an experiment is going to work and then it ends up coming out some other way.